Thank you, Ashley. You will know what you know when you know it. That's where we left off last Sunday. You will know what you know when you know it. You see, what we forget sometimes about spirit and our spiritual journey is that it has an evolutionary quality to it. It has a revelatory quality to it. In other words, the spirituality, hopefully, that you had as a child is not the spirituality you have today, the understanding about God or your relationship to God. You know, when I was a child, as Paul says, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, big guy up there in the sky, here's my list of things I want, and get them for me now, God, and that was my concept of God. And over the time of years, you know, we kind of tend to still default to the God of our childhood, don't we? Because somehow it's very ingrained within us at really the cellular level. So we have to kind of struggle a little bit to do some work to open up our awareness that God is ever revealing the God self to us and through us in every aspect and area of our life. And as a result of that revelation, as a result of that evolution, if you will, then we know and have a broader, deeper, greater understanding of that infinite mystery. You know, people say that the phrase that I say often, and many of us do, there's only one constant in life, and that's change. Well, yes and no. It is true that on a human level, there is a constant. We are changing. Yesterday was yesterday, tomorrow's tomorrow, today's today. We have a linear quality about our life. We have an exploration of our mind. We know things today we didn't know yesterday, and on it goes. But at the level of spirit, there's a foundation that never changes, that never goes away. And the challenge we have is trying to understand and learn about this foundation that is beyond language. It is beyond our ability to really grasp with our minds, because what we're saying is God is energy, mystery, and silence. And so the only way we can talk about it is through metaphor and story. What is this foundational level of spirituality? Now, throughout the month of January, we've been talking about that there's really two levels of spirituality, and it's important that we recognize that one is not better than the other. They go together. This is a tandem event. Okay? And that's a big part of our problem is we want to make them separate. Well, that spirituality isn't good and this one is the real thing. No, you live out your spirituality in a human life and throughout your human life. Therefore, you cannot discount what's going on in your body or in your mind. But we're calling that the secondary spirituality or the psychological spirituality. It's the part of spirituality we know so well because it's what we read, it's what we say, it's what we do. And that's tangible, that's quantifiable. We talk about it in Unity as thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. The thoughts that I think is what comes out into the reality of my life. Okay? But there is another part of that puzzle, and that is the foundational level that never changes, that is a constant in our life always. And again, struggling with talking about what that looks like is difficult. An analogy we might use is like our DNA. Now that's an interesting analogy. At the very core of our being, we have a DNA that's both our mother and father, ancestors and ancestors, great ancestors, and even more ancestors. And we will never be divorced from them as long as we are walking in a human form. It's a given that your DNA is a compilation of all of the DNAs that came down through your heritage. And you will never get away from that. And so this is true with spirit. You are always God life. God doesn't say, okay, you haven't been good today, so I subtract my life from you. Oh, you haven't read the Bible 3 times, I subtract my life from you. No, God said in the moment, in the ex nihilo, in the nothingness, let there be, and life came forth. And your life and my life came forth from that one primal, essential foundation that will never change, that is energy, mystery, and silence. How beautiful, how wonderful. What a gift. What a gift this life really is. So talking about this foundational spirituality, a couple things we might know about it. First and foremost, it's relational. Let's face it, all of life is relational. We have relation to all things, right? On a human level, I have a relationship to this building. I work here. I have a relationship to you. You come here and you're part of the congregation. I have a relationship to my car, my home, my spouse, my friends, all of that. It's relational. Everything is relational. Well, that's true of God, too. Everything is relational. We have a relationship with energy, mystery, and silence, whether we know it or not. So here's a couple things. I'm struggling with this in my own spiritual journey because what I'm feeling is something is out there. Something is way at the edge of my understanding. Something is way, way at the edge of my knowing. And it's calling me. It's calling me to come and see, come and experience, come and realize, be in the presence of that silent communion. And let me, Spirit, tell you, Marianne, what I'm all about. And I feel that. And I sense it every day. What I discern at this moment in my spiritual journey is, first of all, it takes trust, openness, and humility. We have to trust that God is everywhere present. We have to trust. Now, hear that again. We have to trust that God is everywhere present. Here's what we do with our language. We say, Marianne, I don't come to church because I find God out in nature. Now, that's true. But what we are saying is, therefore, I can't find God anyplace else. Do you hear the languaging that we're doing? So I need to go to the mountaintop to see God because God isn't anywhere else. And what I'm trying to tell you over and over and over again, I'm trying to experience myself, is that with every breath and in every moment, this foundation is ever connected. I don't have to go anywhere to find God. I'm here. God's here. What's missing is I don't trust it. I don't see it. I don't experience it. So because my human self is sort of in the way, I want to taste it. I want to touch it. I want to check it off on my list. I want to feel God's presence. We have to get beyond that feeling thing, beyond that sensing thing, to a level where we just know that we know that we know underneath it all, no matter. And here's the issue. I get that when I'm feeling good. I get that when my checking account balances. I get that when I'm healthy. I get it when everything's going well in my world, but I don't get it when I'm sick, when I'm scared, when I don't know, when I'm confused, when I'm lost, when I don't get it. I want to go to the mountaintop and somehow get it. And what the story tells us is, it isn't about the mountaintop. It's about right here and right now. We must trust that no matter, regardless of the outer appearance of things, and we use this affirmation, and I use it myself often, I am aware that God is aware. Whatever I'm going through, whatever it is right now, I'm aware that God is aware. God is present right here and right now. Because you see, in relationships, what happens is, the more trusting you become, the more open you become. You don't trust people right off the bat, right? We have a certain thing, and I want to make a clear distinction between judgment and discernment. You have a gift of discernment. And the discernment says, you know what, I can be polite to this person, but when the next bus comes, I got to get on out of town. I don't need to stay here. I don't need to give you my charge card, bring you into my house, marry you, and take care of you for the rest of your life. There's a discernment quality here. Okay, as my life goes on and evolves and grows, my trust in God grows and evolves as I listen more clearly, as I'm open more thoroughly to that voice, then I begin to say, I'm hearing something I can't put my finger on and I can't really explain, but what I do know is I need to honor myself. How many of you know what it feels like to dishonor yourself? Don't we? They said, don't go there. They said, something within you said, don't spend it. Something within you said, don't do it. Something within you said, better get home early tonight. Something said something, and you said, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to do it anyway. And then you say, now, God, how did I get in this mess? God's like, don't blame me. I tried to tell you. But to listen deeply. Because the third quality here is humility, or what I might also call obedience. When we hear the voice of Spirit, when we hear the promptings of motion of energy that's moving through us, we need to act upon it. Now, sometimes, remember, it's a discernment. Sometimes you think, well, I really think I should be going on for my master's degree. And this happened to me some years ago, and I really wanted my master's degree. And so I began to do the footwork. I got the applications. I went to the different colleges in the local area where I was at. It didn't quite match. And finally one day I said, okay, I did all the footwork, and what I realized is it's not mine to do. I will get that education some other way. And I did. So listening and discerning all the time, being aware and being present and being in that holy, sacred moment. Because I think we all struggle with knowing that God is present and in charge of our life when we're here in the midst of the muck. It's difficult. It is a practice. So let's look at it, some of the popular books that have been on the market. You know, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. And then we had Ram Dass, who said, be here now. And then we had Moses. We have to have a story about Moses. All too often we don't understand some of the subtle nuances that these stories really hold for us because we say, well, the story is old and is it historically accurate? Now, on the level of story, that doesn't matter. Did Cinderella really have a pumpkin for a carriage? Does it really matter when we're trying to understand story? It has nothing to do with that, right? It's a story that has a point that's touching our lives. So in the book of Exodus, we see that the Moses story has 3 parts. Sometimes we don't recognize that, but there are 3 40-year parts. And what we know about the number 40 is that 40 is a time of transformation. 40 years. Moses didn't go down easy, folks. 40 years is a long time, and he went through it 3 times. You think he'd have learned after the first one, but no, he went on to go 40 years. So now what happens is the story opens up. Our story is going to open up around chapter 3 and around verse 5, where Moses has encountered this burning bush. But you can't understand the burning bush story unless you know the 40 years prior and the 40 years after. So the 40 years prior to this, we know that Moses was raised in Pharaoh's court. He was a spoiled child. He was the favorite of the court. He did everything right. He had a great education. He was handsome. He looked like Charlton Heston. All of that, we know, because we've seen the movie. So here he is, and he's sort of at the height of everything he's ever wanted. When he finds out, or becomes more aware of, his relationship to the Hebrew people, he tries to defend them, and what happens? He runs out because he has killed someone. He's afraid Pharaoh is going to punish him, so he runs away. First 40 years comes to a close. What can you say about those first 40 years? It was a growing experience. It was the maturing of a little tiny baby, that's where the story started, now to an adult man who is aware of his spiritual nature. But he doesn't really know how, and he doesn't really know why. But something inside of him says, there's more to you, Moses, than what is just around you. You have a connection to these people, and you have a life beyond what you're seeing in the palace. So for the next 40 years, Moses goes out to the wilderness, goes out to the desert. He marries, has children, has a family. He's a shepherd for all intents and purposes. He does not even remember what it's like to be in the court of Pharaoh. That's what I mean by transformation. You know, when you look back on your life, and I look back on it sometimes and I say, who was that person? I have pictures. I've got the journal, but I have a hard time thinking that was me, especially when I made some of those challenging life mistakes. I have a hard time thinking that was really me. And yet, it's part of who and what I am to go forward. So here is Moses, totally comfortable with where he is, totally in tune with where he is. So much so that he often spends time in the wilderness with the sheep, just communicating with nature and with God, until one day he comes to this burning bush. This is most curious, of course. The story tells us that he's like, what is this all about? The bush never sort of burns up. This is odd. I'm going to go see what happens. But before God reveals to Moses his identity, that's the part of the story we kind of run to, you know, where Moses has this moment of revelation from God. What happens immediately in the verse before? Here Moses is out in the wilderness with the sheep. He's pondering this tree that doesn't seem to be burning. It's like, it's burning, but it's not burning up. The fire is not dying. He's pondering it. He hears this voice calling his name, Moses, Moses. And what does the voice tell him? Folks, this is the most important thing you've ever read. God says, take off your shoes. Because the place you are standing is holy ground. God does not say, Moses, on Sunday at 10:30, I want you to show up at the Unity Church of Christianity, and then you'll get spiritual. He does not say, why don't you go up to the mountain, Moses, and then I'll meet you there. He does not say, after you do penance or after you fast or after you do anything. He says, take off your shoes right now. Do it right now. Because where you're standing is holy ground. There is no other holy ground than in this breath and in this moment. And I think to myself, in looking back on that moment for Moses when he takes off his shoes, you know, how intense is that in our own life? When we're tired and we're frustrated and we're grieving and we're crying and we're hurting and we don't want to, you know, God, where did you go? Why did you leave me? And God's saying, take off your shoes because the place you're standing. You know, I don't know about you, but there's places I've stood and I don't feel good about it. And I don't feel good about me. And I don't feel good about things that are happening to me or through me or around me. But there is the place. See, what you and I want to do, or at least I'll speak for myself, is I want to say, I'll take off my shoes because it's holy ground when I feel holy. When I feel a sense of spirituality. When I feel like, you know, things are good and now I want to come to God and say, here I am all cleaned up and shiny and, you know, sort of churchy and ready for action. God's saying, you know what, I want you dirty and I want you tearful and I want you crying and I want you to get it that before I tell you who I am, take off your shoes right now. Our feet represent understanding because they stand under us. Your feet represent understanding. Why do you take off your shoes in a mosque? Why do you take off your shoes in a holy place? Because our feet connect us to the ground of being. They stand under us. And when you walk on sacred land, don't you feel sacred land? Of course you do. If you're at all attuned to the vibration, to that energy, mystery, and silence, you will get that feeling. This is holy ground. But folks, before God said, who God was. That's verse 6 and 7. God said, Moses, you got to get ready for it. You got to come to me with all your trust. You've got to come to me with all your openness. You've got to come to me with all your past. You know, the 40 years that were when you were in Pharaoh's court and all the mistakes that you made and the 40 years that you spent out here in the wilderness. You're not ready to do what I want to do. You're not ready for the revelation of your life and your heart if you can't see me right here and right now, in the everydayness of your everyday life. And I don't know about you folks, but that takes practice. It takes practice every single day, because I don't want to see God in the everydayness of my life. If you read The Power of Now, you know, he talks about, and you're present with God right now, and right now, and right now. And that's just in the first 2 lines. And by the first paragraph, you're done being present right now, because it's hard for us. We are linear people. We're looking at the past. We're looking at the future. We're not staying so present. And it's an art form of our spiritual journey to stay present. Because what happens in the moment when Moses stood still, took his shoes off, and walked up to the burning bush, God said, I am that I am. And now, Moses, I got a plan. I've got a journey for you. I've got something that's been calling, and it's only yours to do. So often we struggle with, what's my purpose? Why am I here? You know, you're never going to find it as you keep grappling out here with it. All I have to do is fill out the forms. All I have to do is fill out the paper. There's something within us that is calling us to the greatness. And that something that is calling us to greatness is always found when we're willing to trust, when we're willing to be open, when we're willing to be humble and obedient to its call. Sometimes we have to discern it. We have to kind of weed through it. You know, can you imagine Moses standing there? God says, now look, here's the plan. I'm going to be God and you're going to be the man. And I'm going to send you back and get those people, and we're going to come out and we're going to have a great time in the wilderness. And Moses is like, can we talk about this? We're going to do what? See, you and I, even Moses, couldn't handle a full revelation. Moses had to say, okay, what am I supposed to do today? He said, God says, you got to go back to Egypt. Okay, well, that's a simple instruction. I get it. Don't want to do it, but I get it. And as he began to move, what happens? The things begin to open up. The instructions become clear. The people, the experiences, the resources that Moses needed to bring the people out of slavery began to unfold. So in our life, let's remember that moment and try to really grasp that our greatest spiritual challenge is to be present in the holy moment, to take off our shoes, and to understand that regardless of the world situation, the country situation, my family situation, my personal situation, regardless of all of those things, that's the secondary part of my spiritual journey. That's where I work it out. But the first part is to touch the unchanging, always constant, foundational level of spirit that longs with a ceaseless longing to continually reveal the God self in and through every cell and fiber of our being. And our job, just like the story of old or a book that's presently on the market, is to stand still, to take off our shoes, to be open, trusting, and receptive to the understanding of spirit as it moves vibrationally, quickening our soul, healing our spirit, bringing us peace. Thank you and God bless.